What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review episode 7 of season 3 of Star Trek Picard, an episode called Dominion, written by Jane Maggs and directed by Deborah Kampmeyer. And this morning I finally came to the realization that as much as I'm enjoying this show, it just might be killing me. I am not a morning person. I've been training myself to be a night owl for years, but shows dropping at 3 a.m., it's like the worst possible time where I'm at the end of my day where it's really tough to review a movie, or I get up really early and it's the beginning of my day, but my brain is at its least efficient or its least clear or its least intent right around this time. But I was determined to try to pull an all-nighter, but I went and saw the new movie Air, directed by Ben Affleck last night, which kind of threw all my plans in the trash. Grabbed a few hours sleep, but I guess of all the problems one could have in this world, getting up early and watching Star Trek and being a little tired while talking about it, well, it's like, yeah. Find a real problem. But before I go any further, let me just say, in addition to enjoying the show and rewatching episodes, what I'm loving is having all these YouTube channels and podcasts to listen to related to the show. And it seems like this topic of Star Trek Legacy keeps coming up and whether or not we'll get this show. And I don't have all the latest news, but if you feel so inclined, it's time for us to start using the Star Trek Legacy hashtag, and also more importantly, obviously the powers that be out there who greenlight shows respond to number. So whether you're encouraging other people to watch Star Trek Picard or rewatching episodes yourself, but what I heard from Robert Meyer Burnett on one of his shows was that if you really want to do Star Trek right, just getting one season of Star Trek Legacy is not really what you need, because a sci-fi show has so many upfront costs in terms of the prosthetics or the special effects or building the sets, whatever the case might be. They're extremely expensive to make, and then basically over the course of several seasons, those costs get kind of shoveled thin or amortized across multiple seasons, bringing the overall cost down. However, if you're just going to do single seasons at a time, the cost remains prohibitively expensive. And if you really want to get the best Trek out there where people can map out storylines across several seasons, at any rate, maybe we are asking for the moon. But as I was watching this episode, I realized I need a lot more Jack Crusher and Sidney LaForge in my life. They make an incredible team. And also, they're new blood. They're young. As much as I'm loving seeing the next generation crew, I mean, they're all in their late 60s, their 70s, their early 80s. I mean, they are aging actors. And if you have nothing but a crew or a cast of aging actors, well, then you get kind of a show for old people like myself or older. But if you really want to keep Star Trek going, you need a little new blood from time to time. And I just thought that watching Jack and Sydney in action this episode was one of the best parts of it. And I was like, well, I don't know if either of them or both of them will survive to the end, because I've only seen through episode 7, but they would be great core members of a potential future show. In any event, this is all a long-winded way of my saying that I'd be totally down for some Star Trek Legacy. And according to this tweet by Terry Metalis, he wrote, "In case you're wondering, Star Trek Legacy is what I'd call a spin-off show from Star Trek Picard, a 25th century show that explores the last generation and the next." And that's the kind of Star Trek that I want to see. I know there are a lot of people out there who love watching Strange New Worlds and that sort of thing, but for me, Star Trek should always be boldly going. I want to see what happens next in this fictional setting. I feel like you really just, all you do is trip over landmines and get yourself in trouble when you're constantly exploring the past. And I feel like franchises need to evolve and grow and change. And I'm all for Star Trek Legacy if we ever get it. But if we don't get Star Trek Legacy, one last little bit of Star Trek that I saw recently that I think people will enjoy, probably because I've been on YouTube so much looking up stuff related to Picard or actors coming back like LeVar Burton. And somehow I got sucked up in the YouTube algorithm, and it led me to this astonishing clip from the Eric Andre show where Lance Reddick came on and had this very strange, awkward interview. But as he leaves the interview, he gets into costume as LeVar Burton, or actually more specifically as LaForge. At any rate, the language that he uses in the clip would get me thrown off YouTube, but I strongly recommend everybody out there, if you enjoy a good laugh, hunt down the Lance Reddick as LeVar Burton clip from the Eric Andre show, you will absolutely laugh your ass off. But let's dive into this latest episode. And I didn't necessarily think that Dominion was the strongest episode this season. Obviously, I still enjoyed it, but it didn't completely knock me flat like some earlier episodes this season. But that also could just be due to my fatigue and slowly dying from watching the show at the butt crack of dawn. But as I was watching it, I just kept reminding myself, this journey is almost over. You only have a few more episodes. Savor it and enjoy it, because you never know. After episode 10 of this season, it could be years before we see good Star Trek again. So I'm just determined to soak it up, savor it, and rewatch it as much as I can in the weeks to come. But I think my favorite scene of the episode was the very first scene where we see 7 of 9 talking to her old pal Tuvok from Voyager. And she's asking questions about Admiral Janeway and Frontier Day and the entire fleet gathering in the Sol system in a matter of hours. And what was great about the scene for me, initially he passes one of her tests when it comes to kind of quizzing him about their past relationship. And for a brief shining moment, I got chills. I was like, oh my God, we're seeing a Voyager reunion. However, then she busts him for not knowing about the mind meld that he used on her. And 7 of 9 gets really hardcore really quickly. And then it turns into this brilliant adversarial scene where the changeling promises that death is going to come as a relief after what the changelings have planned for Starfleet. And if not for that changeling, we would have gone this whole episode without getting to see Riker at all, because it briefly turns into Riker in order to taunt them and goad them a little bit. But I thought that was a really interesting scene. And once again, for all the Voyager fans out there, I'm sure they were doing cartwheels throughout that entire sequence. But at the core of this episode is this ethical debate, or this moral debate about to what extent are Beverly and Picard willing to use certain tactics in order to defeat their enemies. And they both feel a little bit adrift, and that their moral compass is perhaps proven to be a little less reliable. And I feel like that's always an interesting debate to be had. To what extent are you willing to compromise your own values in order to accomplish your objectives? And later in the episode, we learn through Vadic how Starfleet has compromised their morals and their values in the past, in particular when it came to the experiments that Vadic, as well as several other changelings, were subjected to when they were POWs on Daystrom as a result of Project Proteus. And due to these experiments, that's how they evolved, gained these new abilities, and other changelings that are willing to join their Great Link, they can impart those abilities onto those changelings. But in spite of my not being quite as rapturous in my praise of this particular episode, I did enjoy it, and I enjoyed how we had the kind of dual storylines going on at the same time, where on one hand we have this trap that's set aboard the Titan where they appear as if they're adrift or dead in the water from a battle in order to lure in the Shrike. Vadic and her crew form a boarding party, and they go on board for what turns out to be this giant trap, or this giant battle. However, aboard the Titan, working against the crew of the Titan, is Lore. And Lore and Data are having a small battle for dominance. And there are little partitions inside his positronic body. But as LaForge describes it, his body's more art than science. And so LaForge is a little bit out of his depth. And he worries that if he lifts the partitions between the different personalities, there's a chance they might lose Data forever. And Elise has some really fun scenes, for almost like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He's kind of switching back and forth between the two personalities. But once that boarding party's on board, Lore seizes the opportunity to sow the seeds of chaos and starts working against the crew of the Titan. And as Lore sows the seeds of chaos, it makes it increasingly difficult for this elaborate trap to function properly. And by the end of the episode, it appears to have totally, completely backfired. Captain Shaw gets all beat up, and we see Vadic in charge of the Titan announcing to the entire crew that it's time for everybody to learn who Jack truly is. And we as the audience got to see Jack revealing one of his hidden abilities earlier in the episode, because he and Sydney make this great little team. And as I said before, I love watching the two of them in action. I love watching Jack developing a little bit of a crush on her, which I totally understand. But we see at one point when they're separated and they're fighting two changelings, that he basically looks at Sydney, goes into her mind, takes control, and helps her, dodge and slip and fight and so on and so forth. And I couldn't quite tell if he was using telepathy to give her commands or if he was actually taking control over her body. But clearly, Jack has many secret abilities in his overall repertoire. And I wish I had some amazing theory as to how he got these abilities, or what did he inherit from Picard's DNA that has led to these abilities, and why are the changelings so hell-bent upon studying him so intensely. But I do not have that information at my fingertips, and my brain is way too sleep deprived to cook up any sort of kick-ass elaborate theory. So I will rely upon people who are much smarter and much better rested out there to tell me what the hell is going on with Jack. Or we'll find out next week when Vadic announces it to the entire crew. But as much fun as it was watching Jack and Sydney forming this little dynamic duo to battle the changelings in the episode, I feel like LaForge and Data had some great scene-stealing moments as well, because while Lore is doing everything in his power to work against the crew of the Titan, we have these moments where LaForge is just imploring his old friend to try and take control of the body. And it was just a great reminder of all the shared history between LaForge and Data back in the day. Like, for whatever reason, the Next Generation movies decided to go all in on the chemistry and relationship between Data and Picard. But in the early seasons of Next Generation, it was the Data/LaForge show. They were always having all these interesting conversations about the nature of being human and humor, etc., and so forth. But it looks as if perhaps Data might finally have a chance of becoming human if they can find a way to successfully drop those partitions between the personalities in a way that doesn't completely eradicate Data. But by the end of the episode, we did get to have a few moments where at least Data and LaForge appear to be working as a team again. And the last major scene that jumped out at me is when Vadic is confessing to Picard and Crusher her history aboard Daystrom, where she gives all the details about Project Proteus and how she took on the form of her torturer, the one who used to whistle 3 blind mice to her. But the goal of the experiments was to turn these changelings into the ultimate weapons, the ultimate spies, and it looks like they were ultimately successful, but Beverly has figured out a way to track them, which makes me think that Beverly will soon have the ability to kill them outright if she wishes to. Once again, going back to the idea of like a moral compass, or what ethical lines will you not cross. But it appears as if in the very near future, Beverly's going to have a few important decisions to make. To what degree is she willing to compromise her own values in order to A, save the life of her son, B, save the lives of the crew of the Titan, and C, stop whatever this giant plan is that's being hatched on Frontier Day? But I think that's about all I have to say about this particular episode. Unlike episode 6, where we had all these crazy little details and Easter eggs or member berries or whatever term you want to use. But obviously episode 6 was the mother lode when it came to Star Trek nostalgia, Star Trek trivia, etc. and so forth. This was just much more of like a thriller. But I have to say that if you look at this episode in the context of the rest of the season, 7 episodes deep, what we are getting is the giant Star Trek Next Generation saga that we never got to see in the movies. As the Next Generation movies came out in the 90s, I saw them all in real time in the theater, and I enjoyed them all to one degree or another. I mean, Insurrection, less so, Nemesis, even less so, but I wasn't looking at them with that critical an eye back in the day. I was just having so much fun getting to see Next Generation movies. In First Contact, I went with my friends in college, and we were high as hell, and we had quite a good time seeing that in the theater. But I feel like after all these decades, we're finally getting the Next Generation, like, epic sci-fi movie saga that we never got to see, and I'm just determined to enjoy the ride, savor the experience, and I can't wait to go back through the entire season for like a third time when it's all said and done, and just watch it and enjoy it without having to take notes or do commentary or anything like that. But you tell me, am I being too harsh in this episode, or is it just a sign that I'm too goddamn old to be waking up after a couple of hours and reviewing Star Trek? But like I said before, there are worse problems to have than having to get up early and talk about a really cool show. But I've officially run out of things to discuss, so if you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting that notification bell, subscribing to the channel, liking the video, all that good stuff. And you can always find me on Twitter at Geeking Out if you want to talk more about Star Trek or Terra Metalis or any other topic that I mentioned over the course of this video. But thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.